Hello and welcome to this week's study of Daniel. We're on chapter 2. This is my first week getting to lead the Daniel study, and I just want to say, if you're watching this, thanks for joining us for this study of Daniel. It was really fun as pastors to do the Faith Foundation study, and we were pleased with the number of people that decided to be part of it. And we're looking forward to continuing that on with this book of Daniel, which is an incredible book. It has so many twists and turns, and just the accuracy of the prophecy is one of the things that stands out to me. And we get some of that at the end of our second chapter today. To begin, we're going to watch a short video that I'm going to insert here. Maybe it won't mean a ton to you right now, but it is something we'll discuss when we meet next week. So it's a short clip. We'll take a pause here, and then we'll see you back in a moment.
The actors will often use stunt wires. This way, a character can appear to effortlessly lift another into the air. In reality, the stunt coordinators will be pulling on the wires to hoist the actor above the ground. The other reason for using stunt wires is probably the most obvious: safety. Keeping the actors safe from injury is paramount. They can perform insane stunts and fighting abilities safely within the stunt wire harness. Once the scene is filmed, the wires are removed in post-production. In one behind-the-scenes video on Robert Downey Jr.'s Instagram, we can see a battle involving Chris Evans, Josh Brolin, and Downey. To showcase Thanos' mad lifting ability, Captain America is lifted into the air using wires. Once Cap passes out, Thanos throws him to the side. All of it is measured to show the Mad Titan's power, but also keep Evans nice and safe. Take Josh Brolin. He's decked out in a motion capture suit so the animators can capture every movement and expression Brolin makes. But as Thanos is much taller than Brolin, they created a unique way for the other actors to know where his head is and where to look. The filmmakers added a photo of the Mad Titan above Brolin's head. While it looks a tad bizarre, it really helps. If the MCU is known for anything, it's for the destruction of property during battles. There's always going to be multiple big explosions in a Marvel film. While it's easy to think that these are all CGI generated too, often they aren't. Instead, they use practical effects, meaning they actually blow stuff up and record it. This is done to add more realism to a shot. More often than not, it's easy to see when a big ball of fire has been generated via computers. The stunt coordinators will create a plan to cause the biggest explosion in the safest way possible. If a character needs to be in the middle of it, well, there's two ways to make that possible. Firstly, they shot the scene without the fire and with the character. Then they shot the same scene with the fire and without the character. In post, they essentially layer the two takes on top of each other, giving the appearance that the actor was in the middle of the fire. But this can also come over as unnatural, as well as being time-consuming and expensive. So the second way is to use a stunt person to fill in for the actor. They get the joy of being near fire and when things are going boom. You may not have noticed, but Disney's Marvel films tend to involve fighting. Every single film will involve fist and weapon clashes many times. With that, it's important for the actors to know the basics of fighting and to understand the choreography of the battle. Their stunt doubles can't do all the fighting, otherwise we'd never see the characters' faces in a fight, and everything will be shot from a distance, which doesn't get the audience invested in the battling. Plus, it makes the brawls appear a lot more natural with the actor involved. Often, the actors will require additional training to improve their skills. For example, Robert Downey Jr. is a keen practitioner of Wing Chun.
Okay, you had a chance to watch a short video on some behind-the-scenes footage of some very popular movies. Right now, the Marvel superhero movies are pretty big. Just talking about how they take care of some of those really amazing special effects shots behind the scenes. And the point of putting that video in there was just to think through, when you watch something like that on the movie screen, it feels so intense and it feels like anything could happen and the heroes might die, and sometimes they do. But then you watch a video of what's going on behind the scenes and it's all very carefully orchestrated and choreographed, and the greatest care is taken that nobody gets hurt, that nobody's really even in serious danger. So there are people behind the scenes making all these dangerous looking things happen and keeping them as organized and structured as possible. When we look at Daniel chapter 2, it helps us think about all of human history. Sometimes human history seems like it is spiraling out of control, and things seem dangerous or scary, and we struggle with anxiety or fear about the future, or fear what's going to happen to our world, to our country, to our family, to our church, to ourselves, all sorts of fears. And a chapter like this is so good at helping us look behind the scenes and realize, oh yeah, more than a movie director or special effects coordinator or producer or actors or stuntmen, whatever else, we have an almighty God who's working behind the scenes. And this is all very carefully orchestrated. And every man or woman that feels like they are so powerful and so important in running a country or things like that, well, chapter 2 of Daniel helps us understand they're really not that powerful. There's a God behind the scenes that's pulling the strings, and everyone only has as much power as God allows them to have. So with those thoughts in mind, let's get into Daniel chapter 2. If you have the sheet in front of you, you have two very basic objectives. One is give one clear reason from this text why we can be confident in a seemingly impossible situation. The situation that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego find themselves in this chapter does seem impossible. And it's not the last time that will happen in the book of Daniel, but the confidence that especially Daniel shows in this chapter is remarkable and something that I think would be good for us to strive to imitate. Think about God is still with us today and 2,500 years later. Second objective, make one application from this text regarding our feelings about the world in 2021. Certainly we could list many reasons to feel a little unsteady and unnerved about our world today. And this was a perfect time to study the book of Daniel because those Israelites, especially those carried off into exile, had reasons all over their life. And just constant reasons to think, well, God has lost control. And no, the book of Daniel helps us understand, no matter what it looks like, God is still very powerful, very loving, very active behind the scenes. So let's jump into our first section. I'll read the text if you want to follow along. We'll read all the verses because there's a lot to discuss here. We won't go through all the activities or questions, kind of like we did in Faith Foundations. We'll save those for the Zoom classes, but we'll comment on a few of them as we go. So put up our little picture here first. There's a statue that makes an appearance in Nebuchadnezzar's dream later on. It's a very interesting image, and this is one artist's attempt to sort of capture this image. So Nebuchadnezzar's demand. We'll read the first 13 verses on page 1. The second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came and had stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces, and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Just to pause briefly there. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and we do know from the Bible that God often spoke to people or communicated to them through dreams. If you think of the book of Genesis, Joseph rose to power as he was given by God to interpret dreams of two guys in prison where he was, and then to interpret the dream of Pharaoh himself, the leader of Egypt. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, at first was planning to leave Mary when he found out that she was pregnant and assumed that she had been unfaithful to him, and God spoke to Joseph in a dream and told him, don't go. This child Mary is carrying is actually the Son of God. So God does speak in the Bible to people in dreams. Now Nebuchadnezzar tells his magi and kind of spiritual crew, not only do I want you to interpret the dream for me, I want you to tell me what the dream is, which seems unreasonable. But you think about it, if Nebuchadnezzar would have told them the dream, with all the details of it, couldn't they have just told them whatever came to the top of their head, whatever, so the statue means this. So Nebuchadnezzar is thinking through this and thinking, well, if I just tell them the dream, I don't really know that their interpretation is valid. They could just be spinning these tales for me. So Nebuchadnezzar is actually very clever here in saying, not only do I want you to interpret the dream, but to show me that you really have the ability to do it, I want you to tell me what the dream was without me letting you know. So a little bit of a test here. And in his defense too, this we can say this. It was a harsh request and probably too far to say I'm going to kill you if you can't interpret this dream. Nebuchadnezzar is sort of a wild card in that regard. But at the same time, if these guys really were what they claimed to be, these spiritual experts, shouldn't they have been able to contact their gods and find out what the dream was? So in some ways, Nebuchadnezzar sort of poking a hole in the whole system. You guys aren't really who you say that you are. Now, was Nebuchadnezzar serious about this threat to kill them and turn their houses into rubble? Well, as we talked about last week, Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of Babylon. He had been a general in the Babylonian army and was known for being pretty ruthless. This is from 2 Kings 25. Zedekiah, the king of Israel, was taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where sentence was pronounced on him. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. I should have given you a little warning ahead of time. That's pretty brutal, those couple of verses there. But the reason I put that up there is to illustrate this is the kind of stuff that Nebuchadnezzar would do. So Zedekiah had defied Babylon. So as punishment, Nebuchadnezzar kills Zedekiah's sons before him, and then gouges out his eyes. So the very last thing you would see was the death of his kids. That's pretty awful. And again, the reason I quote that here is just to say, is Nebuchadnezzar serious about this threat? Oh yeah, absolutely he's serious. All right, back to the text, verse 7. Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream and we will interpret it." So again, they're saying, there's no way around this, sir. You have to tell us what this dream is if you want to interpret it. Verse 8, then the king answered, "I am certain that you're trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." So again, these people are supposed to be able to communicate with the gods, and they're openly admitting here, we can't do it. This is impossible. Verse 12. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death. Men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. So they're going back and forth to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar finally gets sick of it. It says, "How dare you push back on me? Guess what? All of you are going to die. Not just the ones that gathered here today, but this whole general class of wise men, of magi. You guys are gone. You're all dead." The first activity I have, we'll talk about this in the Zoom class a little bit, but just the Babylonians had so many gods, like a lot of other cultures. They had a sun god and a moon god and a mother god and a father god and an earth god and all these different gods. So that's really what gave all these guys a job, a career, just the ability to navigate through this field of divinity, all these different gods. It's our culture is different today. We wouldn't necessarily call out all these different gods that we have, but one of the things I thought of is the rise in popularity of things like astrology again. When I was growing up, that seemed to be a big deal. Like you'd go get your horoscope, or you could call some psychic hotline, or you'd look in the newspaper, and underneath the Garfield comics, you'd have your horoscope. And that seemed to have gone away, at least it seems to me, but now it's kind of back. This is a screenshot from Instagram. So if you want, you can follow this person who's 1, an astrologer, 2, a life and career counselor, 3, a dentist, and then 4, I don't know what a vastu specialist, but this Dr. Yodi Kalra, anything you need, apparently, at least spiritually or dentally, they've got it covered. Point being, people, whether this world feels like it's spiritual or not, people are always going to look for something spiritual. They're always going to gravitate towards something that gives them hope for beyond this world, beyond what they can see. For the Babylonians, it was these many different gods, and Nebuchadnezzar finally gets sick of it here. But our culture has not changed in that regard. People still look for spiritual answers. They just tend to not look for it from church, which is a really sad thing. There are so many answers to be found in the Bible, in church, but that seems to be the last place a lot of people look. Thinking now about Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, who it seems like, so they were taken to Babylon when they were teenagers, so they're maybe 18 or 19 at this point when chapter 2 happens. They haven't finished their whole 3-year training course, and they receive word that you guys are going to die. And you just think, how would you feel if you're one of these 4 men who'd been taken away from your homeland, and you're making the best of it, right? You're training in the government. You've maintained your faith. You're at the risk of embarrassment. You're still living out your faith before God. Chapter 1 talked a lot about their insistence on eating a certain kind of diet or maintaining their faith. So they're doing it, and now you just think, why did God bring us here? Why did God bring us to this foreign land if He just was going to kill us? I think that would be a temptation to think that. Let's see how Daniel and his friends actually react. So again, we're skipping over some activities because I want to save those for the Zoom class. But on the second page there, God answers the prayer. So, verse 14. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. So Nebuchadnezzar tells one of his officials, hey, go kill all those wise men. So Arioch is going to go do it. And Daniel, this is another case where you see his abilities and his personality is so strong and so true that people can't help but just react to him positively. So Daniel speaks to him with wisdom and tact. Verse 15, he asked Arioch, the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's the new Babylonian names. We would know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So, a situation looked hopeless. Nebuchadnezzar says, not only interpret my dream, but tell me the dream in the first place. Nebuchadnezzar's, Babylonian officials throw up their hands in frustration and say, there's no way, we can't do it. Daniel, by contrast, immediately turns to God and says, I know I can't do this, but God, would you please be merciful to us and reveal to us this dream so that we don't have to be killed? And God answers that prayer. Somehow during the night, God reveals this whole dream to Daniel, and his response is so admirable. One of the activities talks about Daniel's prayer, and just a few things to note about Daniel's prayer there. First of all, the praise. I think a lot of times when we're in need, we're so good at praying to God. We're so good at praying prayers of supplication to God. God, you got to help me. I'm lost without you. That's a good thing. But then when we get what we want, we so quickly forget what it was like to be in need, or we forget that God is the one who supplied the answer or the solution. So it's great that Daniel's very first thought is, thank you. And one of the things he says about God in his prayer is he deposes kings and raises up others. What a great week to have this chapter to study, right? You think of how crazy things have been in our world for a long time now, longer than 2020. Before that, our world just has been crazy for a long time. But just think of how broken our political system has seemed to be in the last few months especially. And Daniel just cuts to the chase and says, nope, God's in charge. It doesn't matter what mistakes, grave errors our politicians make, the good things they do or don't do. It just doesn't matter because God's the one that's in control. And for me going through this study personally as a Christian, this was very helpful just to remember, God's the one behind the scenes. Think back to our introduction with the behind the scenes, the stunts. Like, no, God has this all very carefully planned out. And then the third point, he reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness. So who knows what the future holds? Who can look into the darkness and see what's there and not be afraid of it? Whether it's sin or the devil or death itself. God is. So who alone could answer this prayer from Daniel? Who alone could be the solution to this impossible situation? Only God. It's only God. Okay, moving on to Daniel's meeting with Nebuchadnezzar. We're on the third page now, verse 24. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, so that's his Babylonian name, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about. But," this is huge, "there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these." So, just first of all, we see a contrast here between Arioch and Daniel. I don't know if you caught that. When Arioch comes to Nebuchadnezzar, did you catch what he said? "I have found a man among the Jews who can interpret your dream." In other words, Arioch takes credit for this. What had Arioch done? Nothing. Daniel had come to Arioch and told him, "I can do this." If Daniel hadn't said anything, Arioch would have just proceeded to kill Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. So, a contrast here, you see Arioch feeling very good about himself and making this about his ability and the chance to earn praise in God's sight, as opposed to Daniel is the polar opposite. What a temptation for Daniel here to just say, yeah man, nobody else could do it. Guess who did it? Me, Belteshazzar/Daniel. I interpreted the dream. You're welcome. But instead, there's such humility. Daniel insists that credit must go to God, and that is that shouldn't be missed here, that Daniel refuses any credit and throughout this whole ordeal puts the spotlight on God. May we do the same thing in our situations. Okay, back to the text, verse 29, right, kind of in the middle there. "As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces, became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth." What an interesting dream. You and I probably have weird dreams. I don't remember a lot of my dreams. But I've certainly had some weird ones in my life, and this is right up there with a weird dream. And the symbolism in here is so rich. So just to point out one more time how Daniel refuses to take credit, puts the spotlight on God, and now here comes the interpretation of the dream. Verse 36. "This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the king of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After that, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, the third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture, and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Amazing interpretation, amazing scene. Let's walk through what we could suggest as an interpretation. So the head of gold, Daniel actually calls it out. He says that's Babylon. The head is the most important part of the body. Gold is a precious metal, more precious than silver or bronze or anything else. So that's Babylon. According to Genesis 10, Babylon had been one of the very first empires, if not the first. So Babylon had been around for a long time. So Genesis 10, you think back, this is pre-Abraham, and we think of Abraham being about 2000 BC. At the time of this is about 500 BC. So if that's the case, that means Babylon had been an empire for over 1,500 years, which is a long time. So the longevity there is maybe one of the big reasons why Babylon gets that status as gold, as the head. And also Babylon had a reputation as an extremely organized and strong kingdom, that their kings were strong, and the people trusted the king, and the armies were very well organized. You maybe talked about that in the first lesson a little bit. Just the Babylon is fighting these battles on a couple different fronts, and they're not having a problem winning them. Next, the silver, the chest and the arms. I think that could probably be Persia. Cyrus defeated the Babylonians and brought their reign to an end. That's actually talked about in the book of Isaiah, and I believe that's how chapter 1 ended too, that Daniel survived until the reign of Cyrus started. So Cyrus was a Persian ruler, and Persia really took Babylon's place on the world stage. So Babylon's power dwindled quickly, and Persia took its place. But Persia never rose to the status of an empire like Babylon. And as it says there, the Persian king's power was limited by the growing power of nobles. So the Persian monarchs were not like Nebuchadnezzar. They didn't have the power that he did. And so, again, it didn't last as long, not nearly as strong. That probably fits Persia pretty well. Moving on to the bronze belly, that really fits with Greece. Greece very quickly overtook Persia and became, again, we're talking about world powers here, became a conqueror on the world stage. Alexander the Great is one of the more well-known world rulers. He conquered most of the known world. As it talks about the bronze belly, that really fits, as it says, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. And this could be just a legend, but it's said about Alexander the Great that he got to what would be the Pacific Ocean, and he wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. Greece really dominated the world at the time. So this bronze belly, replacing silver, really fits that well. Then the final kingdom, fourth world empire, would be Rome. These iron and clay legs and feet. Rome took over for Greece about 146 BC. Rome was another empire that lasted for a long time, hundreds of years. It was a leading power when Jesus came to earth. Read the New Testament, you're well aware of that. And it was an extremely strong empire. So iron is a strong metal. But you maybe noticed, as Daniel talked about this empire, this repetition of clay being mixed with the stronger metal. Those two elements, those two materials, do not join well together. So you have this empire that's strong in many ways, but is also brittle in some very important ways. And if you're a student of history, you know that Rome did self-destruct. There really weren't a lot of reasons for Rome to fail, but it did. And a lot of it had to do, as you see there, with the corruption. Rome was so immoral and so corrupt, and Rome's leaders were you can remember some of the things about the emperors and Nero and people like that and how awful they were. The intermingling, the clay and the metal here, that could be a reference to the intermarriage that took place. So Rome conquered so much of Europe, and a lot of those Europeans then ended up moving down and intermarrying with Rome. In some ways, that really weakened Rome's sense of self and who they were, and they had such pride in being Roman. And as that sense of being Roman kind of got diffused, that really weakened this whole, we're all in this thing together, and Rome just sort of busted apart until its final downfall in about 500 AD. So there you have the empires that fell. Finally, the one that stands is the rock that's not quarried by human hands. Who could that be? That's Jesus, right? Jesus is this rock that is sent down not by human hands but by God. Jesus ultimately takes down all these kingdoms. So much of the the verbiage in the New Testament talks about Jesus being the Lord of all and everything's put under his feet. And we see that today. Not one of these empires still stands, no matter how powerful they were. And they were extremely powerful. And this rock becomes a mountain that fills the whole world. That's the Christian church. So the Christian church has lasted how long now? You think of how easily the Christian church should have been stomped out in its cradle in those 30 and 40 and 50 AD, and then especially when the Roman persecution kicked up. But instead, the Christian church is spread all over the world today, over 2,000 years later, and it's not going anywhere. That's God's promise. That last bullet point, it will last until Judgment Day. So you see God foretelling through Daniel how all these world powers will rise and then fall, and only one will remain, and that's the Christian church, the kingdom of God. It's so comforting to know that there is someone in charge. There's an adult in the room, and it's God, and he knows how this all plays out. And you want to be on the winning team. Well, it's a Christian church. Not winning as the world says winning. I mean, I don't think you feel like you're winning, in a secular sense as a Christian, but you know that there's a place in heaven waiting for you. You know that God is not going to abandon you. His plan ends with you in heaven, and he will sustain you while you're here below, no matter how chaotic or turbulent this world feels. That's a big deal. The one kingdom that will last is God's kingdom. So let's finish up quickly with Nebuchadnezzar's reaction. Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor in order that an offering and incense be presented to him. Who would have thought at the beginning of this text that this is how this would go? Nebuchadnezzar is ordering the death of Daniel and his friends. And by the end of this text, he's falling down and offering worship, not to Daniel, but to Daniel's God. Verse 47, the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of the mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. So again, he hears Daniel. He's giving credit to God and not to Daniel. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. Again, you think back to the beginning of this text. It's so crazy how this ends up. For Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego sitting in their quarters thinking, well, we die. Today we die in this foreign land. Nope. Instead, God causes a pagan king to confess how great he is publicly. And then these four guys who were, how long? Hours, maybe minutes away from being executed. Instead, they become, very important VIPs in the Babylonian government. So just to finish with this picture here, pictures of before and after home renovations are just kind of fun to look at because you think of how awful something looks, and then you look at the final product. And if you just had this picture on the right of the after, you might say, oh, that's a nice looking room. But it wouldn't mean that much without the before picture. You got to see the garbage and the trash and the destruction to help you really appreciate the final product. And that is the case with chapter 2. You see Nebuchadnezzar waking up from his dream, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes and demanding all these people be executed. And then by the end of the chapter, he's praising the God of Israel and promoting these four guys. That's a big deal. And that's something we should take with us too. Things often look one way to us. It often looks like a disaster. We look around at the circumstances of our life and think, there's no way this can work out well. Well, how short-sighted and how foolish of us not to have full confidence in God, who throughout the Bible does things like this chapter. This is just one chapter, and it's just one of many occasions in which human eyes look at things and say, this is hopeless, and God says, I'm me, I'm God, I'm the Almighty, nothing's impossible with me, and I love you, and it's going to be fine. So I hope this video was beneficial for you, and I look forward to, if you have the capability, I look forward to talking it over with you more in depth in the Zoom meetings on Wednesday at 10 and Thursday at 7. God's blessings to you.